in the third plague pandemic, it was spotted the links between rats, and particularly the rat flea, that when the rats would die in large numbers from plague, and the rat flea would then go off to find a new host, i.e. nearby humans, and infect them with plague.
Have we officially lost our minds is the question that you're going to be asking yourself throughout this episode, because producer Freddy has been trying to get this episode done for quite some time, and now it is finally happening. It is a day in the life of a Black Death rat. We are going to be asking the question how medieval rats differed from modern rats. Didn't know that they did, but they did, and we'll find out more about that. What did people think of them? What was it like for the poor rats when they got the plague? And believe it or not, we have the perfect guest for this, someone who has studied medieval rats as well as other animals. So we would like to welcome to After Dark today, to help us explore these questions, the perfect guest, Dr. Kathleen Walker-Meikle, who is going to talk us through all of these questions and more. And Kathleen is a historian at the University of Basel, and she writes about medieval animals and is currently working with a team of scientists on medieval rodents and disease. So who better than Kathleen to help us in this episode? Kathleen, welcome to After Dark. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for inviting me.
We are so excited to have you here. Now, Kathleen, I suppose the starting point for this episode, a question that many of our listeners will have going in, is that usually if you claim that the rats of the Black Death caused the Black Death and spread it, there's a lot of pushback, right? People will say, no, stop blaming the rats, it's not the rats. So what's that all about? How accurate is that?
Well, for centuries, it was not exactly known what was, sort of who were the main vectors of the plague. In fact, even there was lots of academic discussion about what actually disease it was. In the late 19th century, there is a pandemic of plague. This is called the Third Plague Pandemic, and the Black Death is very much known as Second Plague Pandemic. And there, in the Third Plague Pandemic, it was spotted the links between rats, and particularly the rat flea, that when the rats would die in large numbers from plague, and the rat flea would then go off to find a new host, i.e. nearby humans, and infect them with plague. And we know now from genetic evidence that the disease in the Black Death was plague. It's a bacterium called Yersinia pestis. However, the role of how did you actually get the disease is still controversial and under discussion. So there's been some work done whether it might have been a sort of human lice and fleas might have been the primary sort of sources, and others that rodents could still be more likely to blame. And you'll be unsurprised to know that I still am very much on Team Rat, and will take a lot of convincing because I just think a lot of evidence on the anti-rank camp works on things such as claiming that there's very little historical evidence, which I find, no, there's lots of evidence on rats in the Middle Ages. There's sometimes discussions about the archaeological record, which now we know is more extensive than previously thought. So very much a case of it's under discussion, but everything plague-wise is under discussion, whether, at the moment, for example, there's a lot of work being done showing that it might have actually started several decades before the timeline that we usually think of, 1347, 48, as you discussed. So with everything plaguey, it's very much still up in the air.
So plaguey is going to be my word of the day. I think I quite like that idea. I really like this idea that we can push the boundaries of when we understand plague happening. But I just want to give some context for those of you who might be coming to the Black Death for the first time. As Kathleen hinted there, it's generally thought at the moment that around the 1347, 1348 mark is when it's at least at its peak in Europe, as opposed to when it's beginning. Kathleen hinted there that there could have been earlier starts to this, which is very interesting. But best estimates put it somewhere between 40 to 60% of the population of Europe are dying in the years 1347 to 51. King Edward III is King of England. David II on the throne in Scotland. The Pope at the time is Pope Clement IV in Avignon, who came up in our episode about the persecution of the Jews. So you can go back and listen to that too. When we're talking about 1348, we're talking about medical faculties at the University of Paris who are theorizing that the Black Death was some sort of planetary alignment thing. Something has gone wrong. There are earthquakes releasing rotten, trapped vapors in the earth, and this is what's causing all of this chaos. But nobody is hinting at this moment in time in the 1340s that it might be, well, either the rats or the fleas or any other kind of tick or mite or whatever it might be. So that is our overall idea of what we're getting as we go into this history. But we began with Maddie giving us this image of a rat skipping around the streets, very stereotypical rat in a very stereotypical medieval town. It's filthy, there's people scratching everywhere. But is that actually right, Kathleen? What would a typical medieval town have looked like at this time?
I would push back at the idea of filthy. There's very much, I think, the stereotype for the Middle Ages that everything's dark and filthy when actually everything is usually very bright. I always use the example of medieval heraldry to show how much they love colours, but also on filth. They very much are aware of the problems when you have people living in close confinement with others. So there's regulations against you dumping rubbish. There's regulations against you having your pigs wandering around the city at will. Butchers are told off or are fined if they're throwing out entrails. People that have ducks and chickens might get told off if they're letting all those animals leave sort of their small excrements everywhere. So I think the filthiness, there's, I guess, it's all dirt tracks, but on the whole, it's not as filthy as you think it might be. And also because they're aware of their circumstances. People people had noses back then in the 14th century. And similarly, you referred to, when you talked about astronomical theories at the time and the Black Death, is that those theories that disease is caused from foul vapours was because people often thought that foul smells, bad smells were bad for your health. And so there were lots of regulations against this. And similarly with scratching, people try to avoid, avoid having fleas or lice. We've got lots of recipes for people trying to reduce things such as head lice. You really didn't want sort of fleas. They knew that they were uncomfortable. And similarly, there were also recipes for things such as removing the fleas off your dog.
Age-old problem.
Yes, an age-old problem. But yes, they're very aware. The idea that people in the Middle Ages are living around happily in their filth, I'm afraid, is a stereotype I'd like to very strongly take against. And similarly, it's to do same with washing. This is a place in which your village, along with a rat, probably had a public bathhouse as well.
Mm-hmm. And talking of things that in our imagination of this time period we've probably got wrong as well, rats themselves didn't necessarily look like the rats that we might see today. So tell us what a medieval rat looks like, Kathleen.
Today, and it has been the case since the 18th century, the most common rat is the brown rat. However, in the Middle Ages, the rat you would have seen is the black rat. This is the rat. Its Latin name is Rattus rattus, and it is slightly smaller and less bulky than the brown rat, which really has very much taken over all the environments of the black rat. The black rat itself is not native to Europe and came from South Asia probably a couple of thousand years ago. And so this rat, it's slightly leaner, but it's still got quite a thick tail and is noticeably larger than a mouse, which is the other rodent which people would be used to seeing in their homes. And they do make a distinction between rats and mice. Sometimes the word mouse is used as a generic term for any kind of annoying rodent, but other times they very much say it's a rat, and they'll describe this as usually it is a large mouse. There's normally not that many references to the colour, that it is darker than your regular brown town mouse.
It's so interesting, isn't it? Because it's such a pivotal part of this history. And actually, and we've talked about the Black Death an awful lot on After Dark, but we've never actually drilled down into what that might look like. And I had just always assumed they were the same types of rats that we identify with today. And also because Maddie and I are 18th centuryists, and it's so interesting that you make that distinction that around that time, that's when this idea of what the rat is and looks like and the species is slightly different. So it's interesting that we've been left with this legacy of something other than what they are experiencing in the 14th century. But Maddie has an image here, which is kind of hilarious. That's to me, it reminded me of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Maddie, describe what you're seeing here. It's rats in a boat, essentially.
Yeah, it's not snakes on a plane, but rats in a boat. Okay, so this is an image presumably from some kind of medieval manuscript. And if you've ever seen any animal depicted in a medieval manuscript, you'll know what the vibe is here. So there's a depiction of the sea, there's all choppy waves, and atop this sea is a little boat. And inside this little boat are 4 what I assume are rats. I mean, they look quite mouse-like to me, but that's, interesting that these are rats that are closer to mice. There's one big one at the back with an oar, and then 3 little ones with the oars as well, the smaller oars. And just above them is what I think is supposed to be the sun beaming down on them. I suppose, Kathleen, this speaks to the ubiquity of these creatures in the medieval world, that they're appearing in art like this. But why are they depicted? First of all, why are they in a boat? But also, why are they depicted at all in a manuscript that's presumably made using vellum, that's incredibly costly to create? Why go to the effort at all of depicting a rat?
Here, this is a particularly delightful example. I always call it sort of rats escaping the sinking ship, literally. Is that you did mention correctly that are they rats or are they mice? And it is quite hard to make on an image the distinction. As I mentioned before, usually size is the only thing that medieval commentators really note as different between rats and mice, not colour. And similarly, colour is something I never get too fussed about medieval artists, because they will cheerfully paint cats green, the rats bright blue. So that's not really distinguishing. On imagery, if the artist or scribe has thoughtfully put next to the animal, this is a rat, which, by the way, sometimes they do, I'm always very happy because, yay, I can identify that rat, not mouse. But I think sometimes they're used interchangeably. It's usually the bigger animal. They're often in the company of cats, which is seen as their proverbial enemy. And the reason why they're there in the manuscript is that it's very much part of a tradition in medieval manuscripts that on the margins of the text, and the text might be, in fact usually often is, perhaps quite a very serious theological or liturgical text, and then you'll have what just seems absolute silliness, such as rats in a castle with crossbows as cats are attacking them. And And this was very much, it was seen as amusing, and they liked very much this idea of the world upside down, so role reversal. So just as you will have hares beating up dogs or beating up people because the animal that is normally picked on by the other species all of a sudden gets its own back. Likewise, in a lot of this imagery, you'll have the rats and the mice taking on human characteristics, like they sometimes are even dressed in clothes and doing human activities, like in this case, rowing a boat, or else they'll be doing things such as chasing a cat, or the cat will be terrified or be desperately trying to chase them.
So there's a lot that these animals can represent in a medieval text, which is so interesting in itself. But in one of the questions that I did not, again, this is so interesting because we were talking about this beforehand. We were saying, this will be a really fun episode, which it will. But there's also questions coming up for me that I hadn't thought about in relation to the Black Death. And one of those is, we have a rat and he's setting out on his day in his ratty life. Does this rat have the plague? Is he experiencing, or she experiencing, symptoms of illness? Or are they just vectors? Are they just carriers? And do we even know that?
Yes, they would be infected with this bacterium, and it would be that likely they would die in large numbers. And this has been taken as evidence by, I shouldn't call it the anti-rat camp, the camp that sort of believes that they're not the main vectors of disease. But I'd argue that against that, because just in medieval texts, the authors are often surprisingly uninterested in wild animals. They will not write about mass death often of wild animals. They're really interested in writing about domestic animals with economic value. So when we were talking about medieval towns and legislation to keep them clean, most of it is telling people who own animals, remove your pigs, remove your dogs, make sure that your horse is not defecating in the water trowel. There's very few references, for example, to removing wild animals such as rats and mice. And it's a case of, it doesn't surprise me. They just are not that interested. If I was doing work, for example, on medieval horses or medieval dogs, it would be a case of 99 to 1. There will be more references to them than they will be to any rodent. You really have to sort of rat around perhaps, to find this material.
And Kathleen, you've hinted at this already, but imagine that our rat is scampering through the streets of this medieval town. What animals might it come into contact with? And are the fleas from our rat then spreading to other animals?
Usually not. They'd probably sort of fleas would then go on to humans. It is true that the fleas could go to other mammals, but sort of unlikely in the transmission of this disease. But yes, the rat would encounter a variety of both wild and domestic animals. It would encounter mice, even though in a lot of medieval texts you get the impression that the authors think that rats are bullying mice, or at least are very much the senior partners in the relationship. They're often described as sometimes living together, but it's the rats that are giving the orders, and the mice are sort of living very much sort of under their thumb. So apart from mice, they'll be living with dogs, and here in a town, this will be everything from guard dogs to butcher's dogs to pet dogs to cats, which are being kept as pets, and also, I'm afraid, sometimes skinned by people for their furs. Lots of pigs, because lots of people are keeping their own swine in pigsties. There'll be horses. Sometimes you will have sheep and cows being bought in for slaughter and for sale. So there's a variety of animals, and of course, and people.
I just want to take a little sidestep for a second, because after dark, we were talking before we started recording, and we are all pet lovers here. And I just wanted to sidestep away from just the general idea of livestock and animals more generally into pets just for a second. And I know this is slightly adjacent to the topic, but it is something that I find quite interesting. What kind of animals are people keeping as pets in medieval times? And what is their relationship to them? Is because there's a conception really that the petting of animals doesn't really begin maybe until the 18th century potentially. But as far as I know, people are keeping pets in medieval times too.
Well, I'll have to do a sort of confess an aside. As the author of a book called Medieval Pets and Cats in Medieval Manuscripts and Dogs in Medieval Manuscripts, there's a lot of, they are keeping pets, particularly if we define that as an animal kept primarily for companionship, that you give a name to, that's kept usually inside living quarters, like such as inside the house. And most of the pets that they're keeping are dogs in a variety of sizes and fluffiness, but they're also keeping cats, and cats are very popular pets on stereotypes just as much as there's stereotypes about the medieval filthy city. There was the stereotype of the Middle Ages being anti-cat, and this is not true. They are very fond of cats as pets, and cats also have the good use is that because they can get rid of your rats and your mice, they are sort of something that you can justify that you're keeping, and it's why a lot of people in religious orders are keeping cats for this purpose. But they're also keeping parrots. In fact, the species of parrots they keep is the red-necked parakeet, which is the one that you see a lot in southern England at the moment. They're keeping pet monkeys, they're keeping pet squirrels, pet rabbits, and there's some people that keep slightly bizarre pets. I've found references to people keeping pet badgers with little collars, pet marmots wearing little suits, all kinds of things.
I love it. We need to do a whole episode on this.
Yeah, we absolutely should. Okay, so Kathleen, our rat has arrived in town. He's walked around, or she has walked around, got a sense of the layout of the place, maybe encountered some animals, wild, undomesticated. Now they're going to head inside. Where might you find a rat inside in a domestic space in medieval England?
Here might be anywhere from the walls, depending on if there's floorboards under those. There might not be, it might just be dirt, but if there's floorboards under that, also behind sort of any wooden objects. There's less, it's true that there's less furniture in a medieval house than you are used to today, but still lots of little nooks and crannies. And like mice, rats are animals that really have lived, have lived with humans for millennia and have almost gotten quite used to this situation of living together, when to hide, when to come out and see if they can get any food and so on.
So when I see rats on like social media or on TV, I think they're actually really quite cute. They remind me of my dog. They remind me of Kip actually in some ways. I don't really know why. He doesn't look like a rat. He's a terrier, but still. In fact, I have seen Kip killed 2 rats. I've seen him kill 2 rats. Anyway, look, that's what he was bred for. It's not his fault.
You just outed
Sorry,
Kip out as
yes,
a murderer.
the authorities
on this
will be
podcast?
coming. Anyway, but if a rat scuttled across the floor of my kitchen, I would probably be like, oh my God, there's a rat. Get it or me out of here quickly. What did medieval people do when they saw rats? How do they feel about them? How do they think about them? Similar to how we would today, or is it totally different?
They weren't that keen on rats. They definitely saw them as vermin along with mice and assorted other creatures. And they did think that they were rather strange and disgusting, and this is partly because rats and mice, along with fleas and worms, are generally in the period believed to be born by spontaneous generation. This is a bit weird, so bear with me. So some authors do cheerfully mention that they give birth normally, and he will even talk to the fact, which is quite obvious to anybody who has seen rats and mice, that they are very prolific. But at the time, there's a big belief that all sort of little sort of verminy animals that live on the ground, which are worms, snakes, and so on, that they are born just out of putrid matter, and this is how they come out. And it's also why it wouldn't be that surprising to connect them to anything that is ill that is happening in your house, because these are animals that are coming out of putrid matter being spontaneously generated. And I'm sorry, I know this is very weird. You'll be...
No, this is perfect After Dark material. Don't apologize.
It's a case of they really do not like rats. When you see rats, you don't want it in your environment. You try to get rid of it. And there's a variety of methods they might do, such as rat traps, rat bait, call in a professional rat catcher. And it's a case that it's seen as almost harder to eradicate, I think, rats more than mice. They are often, the poisons are often a lot stronger. But I don't think that they're just happily living with rats, which, by the way, I share that I find rats utterly adorable. Both the brown rat, but the black rat is absolutely gorgeous. And particularly if you see modern day fancy rats that are bred and have really fabulous coats. And yes, if we have any rat fanciers among the listeners, I'm sure they can be petting their rats in pride at this very moment. But yes, it was a case of if you saw rats, you try to remove them. And this might be with a variety of methods.
Let's talk about some of those methods then. The first on my list, Kathleen, is charms. So people are using religious charms, magical charms to get rid of rats. What's happening there?
Well, it's a bit of a mix of like, what would you call religion and magic? That's another podcast. But they are usually... A charm is they'll use sometimes religious wording, such as referencing saints, or perhaps you might do a diagram, such as do a diagram of the cross to try on the earth to try to go and remove said animals. But yes, it's not an official part of any liturgy. But yes, so there's all kinds of charms. There's some very specific magical tricks that you can try to do to remove your rats. There's one that I found in a 15th century manuscript that is quite unpleasant for the rats in question, but you take one rat, you put it in a pot, you heat up the pot, and it specifically says that the other rats will feel very sad and sorry for their fellow rat, and they'll all come out of their hiding homes and come to almost rescue their rat brother, which in itself I find it's a rather interesting reflection on what they thought animals could feel for each other. But there's usually almost I'd call bog standard charms in which you are calling on usually a religious authority to remove the rats or get rid of them altogether.
Are there any specific charms that we know of? Were any of these written down, or are these orally passed on?
A mix of both. We do have some that were written down, and I actually have bought one today.
Exciting.
Which, if you indulge me,
yes,
I will
happily
read out. It's 15th century, and it's in Middle English, and it's addressed to a variety of religious figures. It's addressed to the Virgin Mary and to Saint Gertrude, and this is Saint Gertrude of Nivelles, which is very much a saint that is good for calling on to remove your rats and mice. By the way, despite what social media says today, she is not the patron saint of cats, but she is the person to get rid of your rats and mice. So this is, I'll just adapt the Middle English. So, to get rats and drive them from a place, I command all the rats that are in this place, within and without, by the virtue of our sweet Lady, and that is the Virgin Mary, and Jesus, above whom that all creatures are below, and by the virtue of Saint Gertrude, that holy maiden, and that God granted peace, so that no rats dwell in this place. And rats shall never dwell in this place. And I command that all the rats that are here should flee this place, and no rats dwell again in this place. And from there, all these rats will go. In the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit.
It's definitely thorough.
It is, but it's so right, Kathleen.
It's like a legal document. It covered all bases.
But it's like a legal document. It is like a bit of magic, like you were saying, and then it ends in that really formalistic prayer type thing at the same time. It is all things. It is nothing. It is magical. And here is the end of it. The rats are not sitting there going, "Oh well, she told us we needed to leave."
Yeah, so, that's us told.
Well, guess we need to go now.
Yep. So there were, as well as these obviously ineffective ways of getting rid of rats, Kathleen, there were more, let's say, active ways of doing that. And we do know that rat poison was used in the medieval period. So what does that consist of?
Well, sort of rat poison you usually purchased. And this is actually, by the way, the plot twist in The Pardoner's Tale in Geoffrey Chaucer's The Canterbury Tales. The entire, I don't want to say spoilers, is
been out for quite a while.
I think
You've had your time.
You've had your time to read it. One character goes to an apothecary and buys rat poison, in which he goes and puts in the wine to poison the two other characters. And it turns out that they actually kill him just after he's done this. So everybody dies. And there, in the text, it specifically says he goes and asks the apothecary for poison to kill his rats. And so some of the ones I've found, and I have to advise everybody, please do not try these at home. It includes a bait to kill rats, where you are mixing mercury and arsenic and figs and hazelnut and walnuts and wheatmeal and pig fat and honey, and you make this into pellets. Another very popular way is you mix cream with sugar and put arsenic, so the arsenic you'll have purchased from your local apothecary, on top. Other ones, you mix sugar, honey, and water and flour, which you all boil this up, add some arsenic, and make more little pellets.
This is like when you're trying to make your dog take medicine, you put this pill in a piece of cheese, isn't it?
There's lots of pellets. There's one which is white hellebore powder mixed with barley meal and honey, which you make a little paste that you bake and fry, and make again little pellets into this paste. And there's quite a lot of sugar, in which that is seen as the bit that's going to attract the rats. And you'll also see this in rat traps, some of which are fiendishly complex. Like there's books we have about how to make rat traps, and you could purchase rat traps made by craftsmen, and some of them look just fabulous. Like there's ones that look like little miniature crossbows, and there's also more what we'd consider the familiar box trap, and these ones will talk about putting cheese inside the trap to tempt your rat to go, your rat or your mouse, but the texts refer often to both animals. So they might say bait against rats and mice. Sometimes it's just for rats and sometimes just for mice. And I suppose if you didn't have this, you could always do, I haven't seen any for England, but there are religious anathemas where you can get a priest to ask for all your rats and mice to leave that place.
So assuming that the rat, in this case, escapes the charm, escapes the box or the trap or whatever, the catcher basically, escapes the poison. So there's a few obstacles. Assuming that our rat today that we're spending the day with manages to avoid all of those things, how quickly are we thinking that this disease is spreading around the town? If they're being spread through the rats, even if it's not necessarily by the rats? How quickly is it spreading?
Probably quite quickly. This again is still under discussion by a lot of academics of how fast is the speed, because from the historical sources, they talk about mass casualties in a very short period of time. So they give the impression that it's spreading quite fast, and there's still discussions on how fast can it spread? Can it be possible for this to happen? But sort of, yes, if they were sort of plague rats, we would expect to see perhaps less of our rats, because they would have died as well. But there's always the possibility that we could have a sort of steady, active population of rats still hanging around on the corners, waving their little ratty paws as you are dying.
Now, Kathleen, it must be somewhat frustrating for you as a historian who works on this time period, and in particular on animals, knowing that, of course, for the medieval people, they had no idea that it was the rats who were spreading this disease. Do you ever wish that you could go back in time and tell the medieval folks that this was the issue? And do you think they would be surprised by that, given their beliefs in, bad smells spreading disease and that sort of thing? Would this be shocking news to them?
I think if you could make an explanation, perhaps, that sort of that the rats were also sort of harbingers of disease, it wouldn't have come as a huge sort of perhaps as a huge surprise. It's true that they're thinking that a lot of disease is due to either foul emanations, but the main cause of disease is actually believed to be yourself, your own body, that due to a humoral distemper, that is, all your body substances are all mixed together, and if they get unbalanced, that makes you sick. So often it was sort of unclear of how could you get sick. And as you mentioned before, it's why there were all kinds of theories, and there's theories in plague treatises of how are we getting plague? Is it coming from a conjunction of Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn? Is it coming from sort of bad airs? Is it coming from people putting poison in wells? All kinds of theories that they were putting at the time. But I don't know actually if I almost would want to tell anybody about rats, almost to let the little beasties off the hook, because I've noticed that even today in countries where plague is endemic, they'll often try to mention, like this is, for example, in the US, when there's been small outbreaks of plague among wild animals like prairie dogs, they'll say in the public health information, this is associated with the Black Death, just to warn everybody about how dangerous and wrong it is, when actually today plague can be cured quite easily with antibiotics. So, yes. Leave those rats alone.
This is a pro-rat podcast. Kathleen, we're going to wrap up in just a second, but I can't have you on the podcast and not ask this question, because we so rarely talk about animals. I'm also realising as we chat to you. If you were able to, putting the rat aside, if you were able to highlight one medieval animal that has really stuck with you for whatever reason, that you loved or you hated or you just couldn't, you just wanted to know more about, whatever it was. If there's one medieval animal that really stuck with you, who would that be, and why should we know about that particular animal?
I think that would be the squirrel, the red squirrel, mainly because it's an animal that we always today associate with being fluffy and cute. And what I find fascinating is that a huge portion of the medieval economy is based around squirrel fur. In the late Middle Ages, lots of clothes are being lined with squirrel fur, and you need huge amounts of squirrel fur for this. I think I found one record for the English court in the 14th century where just per year they were buying 100,000 squirrel skins. Wow. So huge amounts on squirrels, but at the same time they are keeping squirrels as pets. And also from last last year, and this is a complete plug out for research published in Current Biology, is that connection between squirrels and leprosy in the Middle Ages, in which squirrels being a potential reservoir of the disease.
Well, you came here for the rats, everyone, and now you're ending with leprosy vectoring squirrels.
My
Who
dogs
knew
will
it?
be glad to know that squirrels are now on the
they
firing
hate
line. They
squirrels,
absolutely
yeah.
hate them.
Yeah, well, thank you very much to today's guest, Kathleen Walker-Meikle, and you guys for listening along at home. Remember, you can now watch us on YouTube as well, and we're not terrible to look at, I would say. Some of us more than others. Anthony, obviously very beautiful.
Yes.
So please do find us on YouTube. If you want to get in touch with the podcast to suggest episodes to us or to give us feedback, you can do so at afterdark@historyhit.com.